You know the exact moment your loyalty to a company dies. For me, Wesley, it was not the unpaid overtime or the stolen credit. It was the laugh. I sat across from Donovan, the chief technology officer, in his glass-walled office that overlooked the city's skyline. I had just asked for a raise, a modest 20% increase after 6 years of building their entire back-end infrastructure from scratch. I had optimized their budgets, stitched together their legacy systems, and deployed 43 critical modules. And what did Donovan do? He laughed. He actually threw his head back and laughed, adjusting his expensive smartwatch like my request was a joke. Back to business. Wesley, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. You know how hard these budget cycles are. We are all making sacrifices. Sacrifices. The word echoed in my mind as I stared at the yellowed ceiling tile above him. I had spent countless nights living off vending machine snacks and stale coffee in a damp basement apartment, writing the very code that powered his sleek Tesla and his corner office. I had built the dynamic predictive load distribution system that became the backbone of their operations. But to Donovan, I was just a line item, an essential but invisible cog in his machine. Come on, Wesley, you are essential. We all know that, but raises, that is a conversation for bigger picture thinkers, he added, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. I did not argue. I just stood up, the silence in the room, heavy with unsaid words, and walked out. The cold air of the hallway felt sobering. As the glass door clicked shut behind me, the realization settled in. I owed them nothing anymore. The architecture, the elegant skeleton they paraded at every investor meeting, belonged to me. The intellectual property was mine, born from my sweat and brilliance, not theirs. And the best part? I had the patent to prove it. Years ago in 2019, after a grueling back-end summit where their senior architect passed out drunk in a beanbag chair, I had quietly filed a patent as an individual. United States Patent Number 10,450,612. Method for dynamic predictive load distribution in asynchronous modular environments. Their holy grail, my Frankenstein. The signature on the filing was not the company's, not Donovan's, but mine. Nobody had bothered to file anything because the legal department was a graveyard, and Donovan was too busy claiming credit for the vision to care about the execution. I had sat on that secret for years, forgotten in the chaos of burnout, gaslighting, and endless sprint cycles. But now that forgotten patent was a guillotine, humming softly over their oblivious heads. The question was not if I would use it, but how. I spent the next 4 days quietly rebuilding the prototype in a private container on a borrowed cloud account. I used a virtual private network, routed through Iceland, and renamed my laptop to avoid flagging their aggressive security software. Every time Donovan sent me a message with a thumbs-up emoji or forwarded an article about team synergy, my fingers flew faster across the keyboard. By Thursday, I had a working minimum viable product. By Friday, I had a meeting with Artemis Systems, their biggest rival. Artemis was the sleeping giant across the street, a company that had the capital but lacked the technical edge that I had built for Donovan. I walked into their headquarters, a sleek building of steel and glass, carrying nothing but a flash drive and a file folder. Valerie, their vice president of engineering, met me in a minimalist conference room. She had sharp eyes and zero time for small talk. She scanned the patent document I slid across the table, her expression unreadable. "This is real," she said, her voice steady. "Not just real," I replied, leaning forward. "It is still deployed. 6 years. They built their entire cloud orchestration stack on it." Valerie leaned back, tapping a stylus against her lips. "You know this is going to start a war," she observed. "They already started it," I said, my voice cold. "They just laughed too hard to hear the first shot." Valerie smirked, a dangerous glint in her eyes. How poetic. Within 10 minutes, we were signing non-disclosure agreements that could have buried a small nation in paperwork. By the second hour, I had a licensing deal proposal in my inbox. By the fourth hour, Valerie's legal team had flagged 12 instances of copyright violation in the public documentation of my former company's developer blog. But the fun had not even started yet. That evening, sitting in my dimly lit apartment, I quietly uploaded version 2.1 of my engine to the Artemis servers. It was cleaned, optimized, and featured 3 massive upgrades that Artemis had been trying to crack for 2 fiscal years. No open source, no attribution, fully proprietary, fully mine, and now fully theirs. I drafted a formal licensing notice to my old company and scheduled it to send the next morning. The subject line was simple: licensing violation and intellectual property infringement review. Action required. I knew Donovan probably would not even open it until his artisanal coffee was lukewarm. But when he did, I knew exactly what would happen. Attached to the email was a high-resolution, portable document format cover letter signed by me, Wesley, primary patent holder. Below that was a stark warning from Artemis Systems. You are currently operating production software in breach of intellectual property rights. Please respond within 48 hours to negotiate licensing terms. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action and platform-wide takedown notices. I did not hear the scream, but I felt the shockwave. Within an hour, my old corporate login was revoked, my calendar wiped, and my work email locked. But my personal phone lit up like a distress beacon. Messages flooded in from desperate colleagues and furious managers. What the hell is this? Call me right now. Wesley, we need to talk. Did you send this? Please tell me you did not send this. Let us be rational. And finally, the message from Donovan himself. You vindictive little brat, you have no idea what you have done. Oh, but I did. I had finally written my resignation letter in the language they understood best. Legal consequences. The corporate machine panicked. Their initial response was a masterpiece of denial and arrogance. An email from their lead counsel opened with, "We believe there has been some confusion regarding the ownership of this codebase." Confusion. That was what they called 6 years of unpaid overtime, stolen weekends, and gaslit performance reviews. I did not bother replying. Valerie and the Artemis legal team did. Their response included a 14-page appendix of application programming interface call logs, pipeline histories, and a forensic timeline showing exactly when my code went live and who tried to slap their name on it 6 weeks later. Then Valerie dropped the hammer. She pointed out that Donovan's professional profile boasted about his creation of the dynamic load balancer. Yet Wesley was the sole inventor on the patent. She kindly asked them to clarify how a man with 0 recorded contributions to the repository was claiming authorship of a patented process. The silence that followed was deafening, soon replaced by chaotic, desperate noise. An internal memo, supposed to be strictly confidential, was leaked to me by a senior engineer who had always seen through Donovan's facade. The subject line was a gift. Crisis Protocol Wesley Fallout. The highlights were glorious. Deactivate all blog posts referencing the core engine, purge internal messages from 2019 regarding code attribution, and cancel Donovan's upcoming panel appearance at the developer conference. Because it was too risky. They were exploring an emergency countersuit, but their confidence was non-existent because I had the receipts. I printed that memo, framed it, and hung it above my desk. The real game had just begun. A recruiter who had ignored me for years suddenly reached out with an urgent principal engineer role. Venture capital firms started asking if I was interested in launching a startup. And an anonymous tip, conveniently leaked by Valerie, found its way to 3 major tech blogs about the massive intellectual property battle brewing inside one of the Valley's most overvalued startups. 2 days later, the headlines dropped. Startup darling accused of IP theft by former architect. Is it time to rewrite the narrative? The articles featured side-by-side comparisons of me working late nights and Donovan giving keynotes in front of my diagrams. They even highlighted his embarrassing typo on a presentation slide where he misspelled balancer as blancer. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I prefer it served piping hot, poured directly over a quarterly earnings call. And that call was scheduled for the following Monday. I had just gained access to their internal metrics dashboard, courtesy of a former junior developer. They had ruthlessly laid off during a culture restructuring. They still had not secured their telemetry servers. I had root-level privileges, and I did not even need to touch a thing. I just watched the dashboard glow with impending doom. Monday morning arrived. I had 3 monitors glowing like a war room, coffee brewing, and a sense of absolute calm. Their Q2 earnings call started precisely at 9 o'clock. It was live-streamed, open to stakeholders, journalists, and former employees with axes to grind. The chief executive officer's voice came through first, cheerful and thick with corporate spin. Good morning, everyone. We are excited to share another quarter of innovation and strategic growth. I muted the audio. I was not there for the corporate buzzwords. I was watching the dashboard. Because over the weekend, Artemis had flipped the switch. My engine, version 2.1, was now fully live on their rival infrastructure. It was the same architecture, but infinitely faster, more secure, and perfectly legal consequences. Meanwhile, my former company was broadcasting a live stream while their entire backend started buckling in real time. Application programming interface latency doubled, then tripled. Login errors surged into the tens of thousands. The analytics dashboard, the very one I had built, spiked with angry red alerts. The tsunami had hit, and Donovan was standing right on the beach. The live stream descended into chaos. Donovan's voice finally cut through the audio feed, tense and rushed. "We are seeing temporary issues due to unexpected load," he stammered. "Our teams are addressing it." But the damage was already done. Right at that moment, one of their largest enterprise clients, a Fortune 100 behemoth, announced they had switched platforms overnight. They moved to Artemis, to my engine. The client posted a public update at 9:14 in the morning, excited to be working with Artemis systems. Lower latency, better security, smoother integration. Cheers to clean code. The post included a winking emoji. It blew up instantly. Developers started piling on with screenshots, benchmark comparisons, and brutal side-by-side performance metrics. It was open season on Donovan's crumbling empire. One user pointed out that the code looked suspiciously like the system Wesley had demonstrated at a hackathon back in 2019. My professional network exploded. Connection requests, job offers, and articles tagging me as the architect who built the machine and then burned the castle down. The best part? Someone leaked an internal message thread where Donovan frantically demanded to know who authorized the patent and why it was not caught by legal consequences. The response from their legal lead was a single devastating sentence. "You told us not to waste time on him, Donovan. Drop the subject." By 10:12 in the morning, their stock had plummeted 11%. By 10:48, trading was halted. By noon, they were trending globally under a hashtag calling out stolen code. While they panicked, I sat in a quiet cafe downtown, sipping a perfectly brewed espresso across from Valerie. We watched the entire meltdown unfold on a tablet. She did not say anything for a long time, just chewed on a pen cap, squinting thoughtfully at the financial carnage. Then she looked up at me, her expression serious. "You know they are going to come for you," she said softly. I smiled, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "They already did," I replied. "And now it is my turn." The fallout was spectacular. They tried to play the victim, of course. By Tuesday, their chief executive officer was on a frantic damage control tour, sweating profusely on financial news networks in a poorly fitted suit. He threw around meaningless phrases like miscommunication, legacy contributor, and claimed that they deeply valued all their engineers, past and present. Meanwhile, their legal team was desperately sending Artemis cease and desist letters, acting as if they had not spent the last 6 years duct taping my brilliance to their golden parachutes. Valerie did not flinch. Artemis responded by delivering a neatly packaged digital folder titled Compliance Receipts. Inside was a notarized copy of the original patent filing, 3 signed witness statements from former senior engineers confirming I was the sole author of the engine, and screenshots of project management tickets with my name on every major architectural breakthrough. The final nail in the coffin was a transcribed recording of a video call where Donovan explicitly told me that it was not about credit, but about teamwork, right after he took my name off a presentation. I had provided that recording myself. They did not respond publicly. They did not respond legally. Instead, they quietly started deleting their digital footprint. Wool Engineering blog entries vanished into the ether. A white paper from a 2021 developer conference was abruptly pulled from their website. A podcast episode featuring Donovan gloating about his revolutionary load balancer was mysteriously replaced with a 404 error page. But the internet never forgets, and the cracks in their foundation were growing too wide to hide. The first real internal fracture happened when one of their most respected senior developers resigned loudly and publicly. He posted a scathing message online, stating that as someone who watched Wesley carry the project through hell and gaslighting, he could no longer pretend he was out. And just like that, the dominoes began to fall. 4 more resignations followed that week. Investors started demanding answers, threatening to pull funding. The board of directors finally moved. Late Thursday night, an overworked human resources analyst, the same one who used to offer me sympathetic smiles after every failed promotion cycle, sent me the screenshot I had fantasized about for years. It was an email thread with a simple subject line: "Immediate termination, Chief Technology Officer." The reasons listed were gross negligence, massive reputational damage, and catastrophic failure to disclose patent conflicts. It was done. Donovan was out. I read the email 5 times, the words washing over me like a cleansing rain. For the first time in 6 years, I exhaled a breath that did not tremble with suppressed rage. But I was not finished. Karma is satisfying, but precision engineering is divine. I printed that termination email, rolled it up carefully, and slipped it into a sleek gift box. The next morning, I stood outside his now former office building. I held a courier envelope addressed directly to Donovan. Inside the envelope was the printed screenshot of the termination thread, a copy of his old message claiming we were a family here, and a single universal serial bus drive labeled with a black marker. The note attached was simple: "You really should have given me that raise." I watched through the thick glass of the lobby as the receptionist buzzed him out. He looked defeated, his shoulders slumped, his face suddenly older. He scanned the lobby like a man who knew he had just watched his entire kingdom burn to the ground, brick by brick, function by stolen function. He opened the envelope, read the contents, and froze. Then, he looked up and saw me standing on the sidewalk. I had my arms crossed. I was not smiling, and I was not angry. I was simply done. He mouthed something through the glass, something I could not hear over the traffic. But I did not need to hear it. Some endings do not require dialogue, they just require a witness. The desperate lawsuit came 3 days later, a messy, performative legal maneuver designed to save face. Their newly appointed interim technology chief signed off on a 47-page complaint, ridiculously claiming I had violated proprietary agreements and sabotaged their systems with malicious intent. It was almost cute. They tried to paint me as a rogue developer who had somehow coerced their junior staff into leaking trade secrets, as if I had hypnotized half their workforce with some kind of architectural mind control. Valerie and the Artemis legal team dismantled the lawsuit like a cheap toy. Their first response was a masterclass in legal destruction. They calmly stated that Wesley was never under contract for intellectual property transfer, and the patent predated all active employment clauses. They advised the company to review their own disastrous human resources files. The second response was a challenge. If they wished to pursue the case, Artemis would require full code audit logs, complete source control history, and unrestricted access to all internal communications regarding the patent. Discovery would be exhaustive, and they asked the company to confirm their willingness to proceed. Spoiler alert, they were not willing. By Friday afternoon, the lawsuit was quietly withdrawn. There was no press release, no public statement, just a silent retreat. The only visible change was a tiny edit to their website footer. The line boasting about being powered by proprietary load balancer technology was quietly removed. It now simply read, "Built for scale. Cowards to the bitter end." But what came next was infinitely better than revenge. It was the future I was rewriting. Artemis Systems went all in on my technology. We launched properly this time. It was a clean build, infinitely scalable, bulletproof secure, and blindingly fast. My name was proudly displayed on the patent, on the product documentation, and on the front page of the platform. And the most surprising part? People actually wanted to work for me. They did not just tolerate me or talk over me in meetings. They collaborated, asked brilliant questions, and properly credited ideas. It was the environment I had always dreamed of building, a place where engineering was respected, not exploited. One late evening, after a particularly grueling but exhilarating sprint planning session, 2 interns approached my desk. I tensed instinctively, conditioned by years of toxic management to expect some sort of excuse or complaint. Instead, one of them looked at me with genuine admiration. and said they had read everything about what happened with my old company. They had seen the leaked emails and the blog posts. I prepared myself for an awkward apology on behalf of the industry, but the other intern smiled and said, "You are the reason we applied to work here. You proved that they cannot just take our hard work without consequences." I did not cry, not in front of them, but later that night, sitting in the dark of my office, I stared at the battered old laptop I had used to rebuild the prototype. It was covered in faded stickers and coffee stains. That machine had started the fire, but I was the one who struck the match. The world had finally noticed the light. Yet, one lingering detail still bothered me. I had not heard a word from Donovan in weeks, not since the day I handed him his termination notice in the lobby. Until a week later, an email landed in my personal inbox. There was no subject line, no formal greeting. It contained just one ominous sentence. "You really think this is over?" I stared at the screen, a slow smile spreading across my face. "Not yet," I whispered to myself, because men like Donovan do not just fade away into obscurity. They rebrand. They morph into consultants, strategic advisors, and visionary thought leaders. It turned out Donovan had been whispering sweet nothings into the ears of a desperate venture capital firm looking to disrupt Artemis Systems' rapid ascent. They hastily threw together a Frankenstein competitor over a weekend, boasting a sloppy user interface, a gutted backend, and an architecture that felt suspiciously familiar. It was far too familiar. Their aggressive press release bragged about a next-generation load distribution system, claiming it was built entirely from the ground up. They even quoted Donovan, who had the audacity to say they were finally delivering a product that did not rely on stolen foundations. They wanted a war. Fine. This time I did not need to rely on backdoors, leaked memos, or anonymous tips. I had an army of brilliant engineers and the full backing of Artemis Systems. While Donovan's new venture fumbled through public demonstrations that crashed mid-click, we rolled out EdgeStream, our massive new platform powered by version 3.0 of my engine. It was an absolute monster of a rewrite. It chewed through industry benchmarks for breakfast and spat out performance graphs that looked like a definitive middle finger to the competition. We aggressively offered early access to every single one of their prospective clients. By the end of the month, 8 of their 12 major contracts had quietly migrated their infrastructure to us. By the end of the quarter, the venture capital firm realized they were backing a sinking ship and abruptly pulled all funding. It turns out that strategic visionaries cannot survive without actual strategy or vision. The industry moved on, leaving Donovan scrambling for relevance. I finally ran into him again a few months later at a massive tech gala. The room was too bright, the music was too loud, and the open bar was crowded with industry heavyweights. I was surrounded by my team when I saw him approaching. He had a drink in his hand and wore a brittle, forced smile that smelled like desperation and expensive cologne. "Wesley," he said, his voice straining for casual familiarity, as if we were old friends catching up. "You win." I tilted my head, studying him. "This was not a game, Donovan," I replied flatly. He glanced around the crowded room, his eyes darting across the banners, lanyards, and massive screens prominently displaying the Artemis Systems logo. "I made a mistake," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the crowd. "Back then, I should have taken you seriously." I took a slow sip of my drink, my eyes locked on his own. "You did not make a mistake, Donovan. You made a decision." And so did I. He opened his mouth to reply, but he had nothing. He was completely out of ammunition. But someone standing behind me did. A young engineer we had just hired, fresh out of graduate school, had been watching the exchange with wide, fascinated eyes. He spoke up, his voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of the surrounding executives. "Hey Wesley, is that the guy who laughed when you asked for a raise?" A heavy silence fell over our immediate circle. Heads turned. Donovan flinched as if he had been physically struck. His brittle smile shattered, and he turned on his heel, walking away into the crowd entirely alone. I did not watch him leave. I had a keynote address to deliver. 10 minutes later, I stood on a brightly lit stage, looking out at an audience of 2,000 developers, architects, and executives. I did not tell them a story about petty revenge or corporate sabotage. I told them a story about reclamation. I spoke about the vital importance of building something undeniably yours, something brilliant and robust, and then, watching the rest of the world scramble to catch up to your vision. I talked about knowing your worth down to the last line of code, and never allowing anyone to treat your brilliance as a line item on a budget spreadsheet. When the applause finally died down, someone in the front row asked me what advice I would give to engineers who feel invisible, whose hard work is constantly overshadowed by charismatic managers. I leaned into the microphone, a genuine smile crossing my face. My advice is simple, I said, my voice echoing through the massive auditorium. Document everything. Build your masterpiece in the shadows. File the patent yourself. And when they finally push you too far, light the match and watch the empire burn. The crowd erupted again, and as I walked off the stage, I knew I had not just destroyed a toxic company. I had built a legacy. The code was mine. The patent was mine. And the future? That was finally mine too. The aftermath of the massive presentation at the Tech Gala was nothing short of extraordinary. The industry shifted its entire perspective on intellectual property rights for individual contributors overnight. Artemis Systems continued its meteoric rise, securing an additional $400 million in Series E funding, largely driven by the sheer dominance of the EdgeStream platform. Our infrastructure was handling 50% of the market's total predictive load balancing, and we had barely even started scaling our new enterprise features. My own team expanded dramatically. I was promoted to Senior Vice President of Architecture, leading a division of 120 brilliant engineers who were compensated fairly and credited fully for every single line of code they wrote. Meanwhile, Donovan's descent into total irrelevance became a cautionary tale, whispered in boardrooms across Silicon Valley. Without the venture capital funding to sustain his slapdash startup, he was forced to shutter operations entirely within 6 months. He attempted to pivot into consulting, offering strategic guidance to legacy financial institutions, but his reputation preceded him. Nobody wanted to hire the man who had driven a billion-dollar company into the ground out of sheer arrogance and intellectual theft. The last time his name appeared in any major tech publication, it was in a retrospective article analyzing the biggest corporate blunders of the decade. They dedicated an entire section to his failure to secure the foundational patent, accompanied by a picture of him looking deeply uncomfortable outside a courthouse. As for my former employer, they never truly recovered. Their stock plummeted to a fraction of its former value, hovering just above being delisted from the exchange. They desperately attempted to rebrand and shift their focus toward consumer applications, abandoning the enterprise space entirely. But the damage to their engineering culture was terminal. Top talent refused to even interview with them, knowing the history of how they treated their core architects. They became a ghost ship, a hollow shell of a company running on outdated legacy systems, slowly bleeding capital until they were unceremoniously acquired for pennies on the dollar by a private equity firm that intended to liquidate their remaining assets. The beautiful, chaotic, desperate noise of their collapse had finally faded into a permanent silence. Looking back on the entire ordeal, I realized that the defining moment was not the launch of Artemis Systems or the collapse of Donovan's empire. It was that quiet, solitary Sunday I spent clicking through the patent office website, meticulously documenting my work while the rest of the company slept off their hangovers. That single act of foresight, born out of frustration and exhaustion, had been the ultimate equalizer. It proved that in the ruthless world of enterprise software, the true power does not lie in the hands of the executives who stand on stages and make grand promises. The true power belongs to the builders, the architects, and the silent creators who weave the digital fabric of the future. And if they ever try to take it from you, you do not have to raise your voice or cause a scene. You just have to hold the keys and wait for the perfect moment to lock them out forever.